Great. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate the invitation to Williams, especially Françoise. Thank you so much for reaching out and for putting us together for what I think is a fantastic opportunity to talk about our work and Maryse Condé in particular. So I've entitled my talk, Cannibal Visions, Condé and Sémiramoth Reimagine the Canon. Somewhere in there, I'm in the mix of it. So this talk grows out of the reflections that shaped my book, The Author is Cannibal, which follows the cannibal's journey from colonial invention to artistic strategy, tracing how a figure once used to regulate and demean became in the hands of post-colonial writers a means of reclaiming agency and reshaping inherited forms, giving us literary cannibalism. Literary cannibalism is a term I first encountered one summer while attending the School of Criticism and Theory at Cornell. There, in a seminar with Maryse Condé, she presented the idea of Caribbean writers who devour other writers in reaction to what history has denied them. Condé taught authors who confronted the French language with a mixture of reverence and suspicion. She reminded us that language was both inheritance and burden, that the work of the writer is to create space inside a structure not built for them. This concept stayed with me. Later, when I turned to write The Author is Cannibal, I realized that what she had given me was not only a concept, but a method, a way of reading how writers take hold of the canonical materials of empire and return them transformed. The concept of literary cannibalism begins in the contradiction that structures colonial discourse itself. The cannibal is cast as both menacing and yet fascinating. As I point out early in the book, and I quote myself here, the cannibal is a figure of ambivalence, both feared and desired, condemned for his appetite, but secretly admired for his freedom. That ambivalence reveals the anxieties built into colonial authority. The colonizer needs the cannibal in order to stabilize the boundaries of civilization, yet simultaneously envies the transgressive freedom the figure embodies. The term's reversal began, as Maryse Condé points out, in Brazil with Oswaldo Andrade's Manifesto Antropófago in 1928, which turned figurative consumption into a mode of independence, with the clarion call to devour the colonizer's culture in order to survive it. The Cannibal Manifesto, as it is known in English, gave us the famous motto now, Tupi or not Tupi, that is the question. Andrade inserts the tribal name of the Tupinamba, Tupi for short, into an obvious reference of the literary canon. As if to further make a point, although Andrade's Manifesto Antropófago was originally written in Portuguese, Tupi or not Tupi was always in English. What then is Andrade trying to convey with the Cannibal Manifesto and its transformation of to be or not to be into Tupi or not Tupi? Andrade cheekily replaces Hamlet with the indigenous as he cannibalizes one of the most oft-quoted lines of literature, to be or not to be. It becomes clear that in the context of literary cannibalism, Andrade's words serve as genesis. In his indigenous rewrite of Shakespeare, we see an early and important attempt at a paradigm shift. And in the Francophone world, it found another resonance. Cannibalism becomes the metaphor through which writers from formerly colonized territories could both acknowledge their dependence on France, linguistically in particular, and also critique it. Andrade recognized that what was once imposed might be remade through ingestion. Thus, when one speaks of literary cannibalism, one is describing a practice of critical consumption and recreation. A post-colonial writer can thus take a canonical text that was never meant for them, never written with their world in mind, and perform an act that is at once intimate and insurgent. In literary cannibalism, the author ingests the original work, breaks it down, digests it, and produces something that refuses its authority. This is the logic at work when Aimé Césaire rewrites The Tempest with Une Tempête, when Maryse Condé reimagines Wuthering Heights in La Migration des Cœurs, and when Boubacar Boris Diop, I don't think we have a slide for that one, reimagines Mérimée Tamango in Le Temps de Tamango. and when Assia Djebar intervenes in the colonial archive with L'amour, la fantasia. The authors, acting as cannibals, bring marginalized characters to the forefront and resituate these inherited narratives within the geographies and histories that the original texts ignored, thereby exposing the limits of the canon's worldview. In rewriting from the standpoint of the formerly colonized, they critique the structures of empire and, most importantly, make visible the profound damage inflicted by colonialism, damage that their cannibalized versions force the reader to confront directly. In each case, the new text resists the structures encoded in the original, it revises them, overturns them, sometimes mocks them, stains them, and exposes their limitations. Make no mistake, it is not an homage, and it is not mimicry. It is a creative act meant to unsettle, to disturb the illusion that the canon is closed, self-sufficient, or universally valid. In this sense, literary cannibalism becomes a method through which one writes oneself back into a tradition that historically excluded certain voices. It is the act of taking what was forbidden, appropriating what was off limits, and transforming it into something that speaks from another position, another history, another freedom. Cannibalism, then, is not destruction, but transformation. It is the insistence that one can seize the most sacrosanct works of the empire and make them one's own, not by copying them, but by metabolizing them into works that critique, unsettle, and ultimately outgrow the originals. The concept's intellectual genealogy begins with its earliest meaning, which is less about savagery than about transformation. And accordingly, we can begin to imagine cannibalism as an act by which one can annihilate and assimilate a prized object. The gesture is double: destruction and transmutation, consumption and transformation, a recreation of what has been withheld. It is a way of taking into oneself what has been denied. In a Freudian sense, the dynamic of cannibalism is bound to love and envy, to the desire to take in the qualities of the other, and cannibalism can serve as a means to obtaining the envied qualities of another. The idea of cannibalism serving as a means to obtain the qualities of another shapes the literary inflection of the term. Cannibalism enters Francophone writing through a process of reversal. What was once named savagery becomes the ground for transformation. Theories that once upheld colonial authority are now at the service of Francophone writers such as Césaire, Diop, Djebar, and Condé. In their fearless rewritings of canonical works, these authors strip a heretofore indomitable other of its source of power. What is seized is reshaped, what is inherited is unsettled. Literary cannibalism emerges from this process of reversal, not repetition, but creative defiance. This is where the cannibal writer's position becomes clear. As Condé explains, the cannibal in literature is the one who knows very well that certain things are forbidden to him, but goes directly toward what's forbidden in an effort to shatter the alienation in which he was held, in an effort to prove his freedom, to provoke, to parody, to tarnish, end quote. Writing becomes an act of transgression, a refusal to remain within the limits that history has imposed. Cannibalism is an impulse towards what has been withheld, a movement toward the forbidden as a means of breaking alienation. What results is a creative defiance that unsettles the very structures that sought to contain the writer. Cannibalism then can be seen as a creative process, taking, dismantling, reshaping. And this is where Condé's own writing illuminates the principle most clearly. In her essay entitled Françoise Sémiramoth Cannibalizes Caravaggio, which brings us to Françoise's work, she articulates the artistic logic at the heart of cannibalism. And here I quote Maryse: "Whatever Oswaldo de Andrade might think, every artist is a cannibal. Cannibalism is not always obvious. Even if it were obvious, an artist is perfectly entitled to transform any work however he pleases. The artist's cannibalism cannot be questioned." End quote. I would say Maryse Condé could not be questioned, but that's for another day. This understanding extends beyond literature. It offers a way of grasping how all creators, Painters, writers, musicians transform inherited materials into something that bears their mark. It affirms that transformation is not theft, but creation, not subservience, but reimagination. It is precisely the form of artistic freedom that defines both Condé and Sémiramoth's work. This perspective illuminates Maryse Condé's profound attachment to Françoise Sémiramoth's paintings. In Quand la littérature rend visite à la peinture and Françoise Sémiramoth cannibalizes Caravaggio, Condé encounters in Sémiramoth's Le Caravage créole a visual corollary to her own literary practice. The act of taking a European master, in this case Caravaggio, and absorbing him into Caribbean color, Caribbean vegetation, Caribbean light. The novelist who once felt confined to words finds herself drawn towards color and light. The painter who once studied the masters of Europe turns their shadows into Caribbean radiance. Their encounter dramatizes the principle of transformation that governs all cannibal art. What is consumed is not destroyed, but reborn in altered form. This is cannibalism in its artistic form. The annihilation and assimilation of the prized object, Caravaggio in this case, in order to create something new, Sémiramoth's luminous Caribbean vision. And so I pose a query. What happens when a Caribbean painter decides to appropriate Caravaggio and when a Caribbean writer recognizes in that act the very logic of creative cannibalization? Together, Maryse Condé and Françoise Sémiramoth form a dialogue, a cannibal communion, if you will, in which art is transformed through ingestion and rebirth. Maryse Condé writes of a scene of friendship that becomes revelation. She details how Françoise, her dear friend, had offered her a painting titled Calamity Jane. She admires this painting and hangs it up. But at the time, Condé admits that she was too caught up with her writing to fully appreciate it. The demands of fiction, writing Erema Conon, Ségou, Moi Tituba Noir de Salem, perhaps her most important works, she explains, had absorbed her completely. She was still living in the world of words. However, everything changes when she attends Sémiramoth's exhibition, Le Caravage créole. There she feels, as she writes, un coup au cœur, an arrow to the heart. The image that most deeply moves her in the series of paintings is Françoise's version of Caravaggio's conversion on the way to Damascus, the conversion of St. Paul. Condé visits the show several times, returning, as she says, encore et encore, again and again, as she says, drawn to the intensity of that encounter. At first, she seeks personal explanation for why she is so drawn to this painting. And here I quote Maryse, Françoise Sémiramoth et moi, nous sommes originaires de la même île. C'est le même air qui a vivifié nos poumons. We are from the same island, she muses, brought to life by the same air. Yet this biographical link does not suffice. The power of the work, she concludes, lies in Sémiramoth's identification with Caravaggio himself. Here I quote, ce peintre italien auquel Françoise Sémiramoth s'était identifiée. Condé insists that the choice was an act of artistic daring. Ce n'était pas un peintre local. In other words, it was no mere local painter she had dared take on. In this dialogue between Caravaggio and the Caribbean, Condé sees transformation. She writes that Sémiramoth, and I quote, a hérité de cette tradition et ingéré Caravage. She inherited this tradition and absorbed Caravaggio. Through this act of ingestion, the conversion of St. Paul and the road to Damascus, Caravaggio's great scene of revelation, becomes something else entirely. European imagery becomes Caribbean illumination. The saints collapse, rendered in a blaze of light and vegetation rather than the darkness of chiaroscuro. That ambivalence toward the cannibal alluded to earlier defines Condé's response to Sémiramoth's work. It is not submission to European models, but the transgression of them. By choosing Caravaggio as her counterpart, Sémiramoth enacts visually what Condé had long articulated in language, a creative gesture of possession rather than submission. The logic of transgression is central to what Condé had previously stated, and I quote, that the cannibal in literature is the one who knows very well that certain things are forbidden to him, but goes directly towards them. Condé's astonishment before Sémiramoth's canvas is precisely that moment of transgression and recognition. What she perceives is the visual equivalent of the cannibal gesture, the appropriation of what was once forbidden to reshape its meaning. To describe this dynamic, I turn back towards my take on cannibalism as an act by which one can annihilate and assimilate a prized object. The two artists meet through the shared logic of cannibalism, to ingest, to transform, and to release. Condé recognizes that encounter for what it is, a form of artistic liberation grounded in possession. Their meeting reveals that art itself, whether visual or verbal, is a space where what is inherited is taken apart and reassembled, where ambivalence becomes creation and where influence becomes freedom. As Condé returns to the exhibition, as she says again and again, her earlier surprise deepens into recognition. What initially struck her on an emotional level widens into a sense of kinship grounded in shared labor of illumination. She comes to understand that she and Sémiramoth work with the same substance, the oscillation between light and shadow, presence and disappearance, revelation and its cost. She writes, and here I quote Maryse Condé, "Au cours de ma carrière, j'avais compris une vérité. Personne aussi bien qu'un écrivain ne peut comprendre le travail d'un peintre. Les deux travaillent avec des matériaux différents, mais tout aussi complexes. C'est d'une double contrainte qu'il s'agit que chacun résout comme il peut." In translation, in the course of my career, I understood a truth. No one can understand the work of a painter better than a writer. Both work with different materials, but just as complex. It is a question of a double constraint that everyone resolves as best as they can. Light is the thread that connects both their crafts. Condé makes this parallel explicit in a formulation that feels like an artistic credo. Pour le peintre, la lumière crée l'ombre. Chez l'écrivain, la lumière est remplacée par les mots. The painter works with illumination, the writer with language, but both confront the same paradox, the difficulty of revealing oneself, one's story, while inhabiting the work of another. Condé recognizes this drama immediately in Sémiramoth's practice. Sémiramoth's reimagining or cannibalizing Caravaggio is not imitation, it is ingestion. It is the artist's refusal to remain outside a lineage designed to exclude her. I write that when an author chooses to cannibalize the canon, they are choosing to irritate by rewriting the work of a white author, which, let's be honest, the tension within literary cannibalism is certainly caused by authors of color appropriating European canonical works, the works of white authors. That irritation, deliberate, necessary, defines Sémiramoth's gesture. On an aside, I also see this very strongly in another one of her paintings, History of Guadeloupe, which we talked about for a little bit. But by drawing Caravaggio into the Caribbean, she unsettles the authority of his chiaroscuro. In place of the master's darkness, she offers light transformed, vegetal, insistent, decidedly Caribbean. Her canvases exemplify another ambivalent resemblance credited to Homi Bhabha, but inspired by The Cannibal, in which cannibalized works are described as almost the same but not quite, and certainly not white. The echo of Caravaggio remains, but it has been reworked, absorbed, digested, altered. The conversion of St. Paul becomes a conversation of the visual field itself. Caravaggio's saint collapses in the shadow. Sémiramoth rises with color. Her palette performs what Condé achieves through syntax. Each acknowledges inheritance only to surpass it, making dependence a point of departure rather than a boundary. Condé recognizes herself in this operation. She sees that Sémiramoth's dialogue with Caravaggio is a visual corollary to her own literary struggle, the same movement toward what was never meant for her. What Sémiramoth achieves on the canvas is precisely that gesture, although now I find out there are works on paper, not canvas, my apologies. An advance towards the forbidden image, not in obedience, but in transformation. By taking up Caravaggio, her work enacts what I elsewhere described as the fundamental act of cannibalism, the appropriation of a form never designed for them, and then altering it in a critical manner. The Italian master becomes, in her hands, not a model to imitate, but material to transform. In that declaration, the path between the two women becomes clear. For the writer, cannibalism operates through the consumption of forms and narratives. For the painter, through the absorption of color and composition. But the logic is one, to transform inheritance into illumination. Their task and their kinship lies in turning what was once imposed into the material of their own creation, and by that act of transformation, perceiving what inherited forms were never meant to reveal. When I turn to Condé's account of Sémiramoth's art, what interests me is the way she rejects explanation grounded in identity. She says plainly that the painter's connection to Caravaggio arises unexpectedly. She asks, pourquoi cette exposition me parlait-elle de façon si intime et si singulière? Why did it speak to her so intimately? It was not just that they shared an island in common. Instead, the connection is anchored in vision, specifically in the painter's power to reinterpret history. Condé describes her reaction with striking clarity. Ce n'est pas une histoire événementielle, il s'agit d'une histoire réinterprétée. It is not history recounted, but history reinterpreted. That historical reinterpretation begins with color, especially with green. Condé writes that Sémiramoth's work is shaped by la couleur dominante de la nature exubérante de son île natale, the dominant color of the exuberant nature of her native island. She delves deep into the significance of the green by recalling the ecological violence of cyclones in Guadeloupe. Après un cyclone, les Guadeloupéens déplorent que le vent ait fait tomber les feuilles de tous les arbres, les laissant noirs et nus comme dans un paysage hivernal. After a cyclone, Guadeloupeans deplore the fact that the wind has knocked the leaves off all the trees, leaving them black and bare as in a winter landscape. This landscape of loss and renewal becomes a metaphor for Sémiramoth's artistic logic. Her work, for Condé, emerges from the rhythms of the island. Foliage that returns after devastation, green that clings to life no matter how battered. Caravaggio's shadows are not reproduced, they are absorbed and returned transformed. For Condé, Sémiramoth's reimagining somehow in her painting imprisons the artist's dreams and serves them up to the onlooker. Through this appropriation, Sémiramoth becomes le Caravage créole. And Condé sees this within the context of art being un vaste festin cannibale, a vast cannibal feast, where artists borrow from each other, and she says, les artistes empruntent les uns aux autres. However, this vast cannibal feast, echoes of borrowing, I would argue, is not without a critical purpose. I write that literary or artistic cannibalism goes beyond borrowing or intertextuality. It is in fact the price the colonizer must pay for the legacy of colonialism. Sémiramoth's work embodies that price. She returns Caravaggio not as she found him, but as she has made him hers. She does not replicate European vision, she reinterprets it. She does not reproduce sacred narrative, she grounds it in Caribbean landscape. Her green is not ornamental, it is historical. It functions in Condé's formulation as une réinterprétation de l'histoire guadeloupéenne, a reinterpretation of Guadeloupean history. Through that color, Sémiramoth rewrites the world that formed her. And I recognize in this process the same gesture I trace across the writers in The Author is Cannibal. Cannibalism here is not destruction. It is regeneration, the remaking of vision, history, and belonging. If Condé felt drawn repeatedly to this revelation, it is because it echoes her own act of creation, a reinscription of the world through art. And here are my concluding thoughts. When Condé writes that Sémiramoth, by becoming le Caravage créole, accède à l'universel, gains access to the universal, she signals that, that the transformation creates a deep aesthetic kinship. Condé conveys this final vision with a disarming simplicity. Je fais fréquemment le rêve que tous les arts fassent la ronde et se tiennent la main, que la littérature s'associe à la peinture, au dessin, à la musique, afin de rendre cette vie si brève et si douloureuse supportable. I frequently have the dream that all the arts go round and hold hands, that literature is or be associated with painting, drawing, and music in order to make this life so brief, so painful, bearable. This dream of various artists and their mediums holding hands in collaborative harmony resonates profoundly with the argument I make at the end of The Author is Cannibal. There I turn deliberately to visual art to show that cannibalism is not limited to literature, it is a broader creative method. And it is for this reason that Picasso's Femme d'Alger, there we go, Femme d'Alger appears on the cover of my book. The cover announces the argument that the transformation I describe is not only textual, but visual. Not only an act of writers, but a movement across artistic forms. As Caravaggio stands in for Europe and Empire, in my work, Delacroix's Femme d'Alger dans leur appartement stands at the beginning of another artistic and cannibalistic chain. Delacroix's canonical Orientalist tableau is an enclosed interior, emblematic of the colonial gaze. My cover art, which features Picasso's 20th century reworking, is not imitation, but ingestion. His variation is, in my words, a case of artistic cannibalism. Picasso takes Delacroix's harem scene, its stillness, its enclosure, its stage vision of Algerian womanhood, and sows disorder in Delacroix's ordered system. The space fractures, the women's bodies are reconfigured, the interior's hierarchy dissolves. But it is when a writer, in this case Assia Djebar, enters the chat, in modern day parlance, that the full force of this cannibal transformation becomes visible. Djebar encounters Picasso's Femme d'Alger and recognizes in his disruption an opening for her own intervention. And she writes that Picasso, and I quote Djebar, renverse la malédiction, fait éclater le malheur, inscrit en ligne hardie un bonheur totalement nouveau. He reverses the curse, bursts unhappiness, inscribes in bold lines a totally new happiness. The effect of his reworking summed up succinctly by Djebar. Il n'y a plus de harem, la porte en est grande ouverte, et la lumière y entre ruisselante. There is no longer a harem, the door is wide open, and the light comes in streaming. In Djebar's reading, Picasso has not simply modernized Delacroix, he has opened the space, and what has been a sealed Orientalist chamber becomes a site of possibility. And in Femme d'Alger, Djebar ingests Picasso's opening and returns it through an Algerian feminist vision. She transforms what Picasso transformed, resituating the scene within her own historical and linguistic matrix. This is the same reappropriation of history that Condé saw in Sémiramoth. Each stage is ingestion, each act returns the previous work altered. This chain, visual, literary, political, is the clearest model for understanding the cannibal logic I theorize. Sémiramoth's transformation of Caravaggio operates through this same principle. The painter takes in Caravaggio's vision, but what she returns is not Baroque Rome, it is Guadeloupe. Vegetal, saturated with green, alive with the memory of storms and renewal. This is the visual counterpart to the literary cannibalism I theorize. The act is not imitation, it is digestion, not reproduction, but transformation. Sémiramoth's series Caravage Créole makes this visible. Her transformation reveals the hidden filiation between Caribbean artists and European masters, a filiation grounded not in obedience, but in metamorphosis. Together, Condé and Sémiramoth enact the dream Condé articulates. Literature visits painting, painting illuminates literature. Each ingests what precedes her and returns it altered. Their dialogue forms a circle, une ronde, in which the arts sustain one another, making creative life bearable. In return, Condé observes this metamorphosis and performs her own ingestion. She transforms Sémiramoth's visual reworking into prose, thought, and aesthetic philosophy. This resonates deeply with the final pages of The Author is Cannibal, where I argue that cannibalism applies to literature, art, film, or any cultural production, and that it forms a path by which future authors or artists can continue to critique the legacy of colonialism. The cannibal gesture is not an end, but a beginning, a method for the future. Let me emphasize that there remains much cause for rewriting the work of the old colonizer as a means of critique, or in this case, repainting of the work of the old empire. As Condé and Sémiramoth show, is already possible, a rewriting that is visual, textual, and historical. Through Sémiramoth's ingestion of Caravaggio and Condé's ingestion of Sémiramoth, the past is not permitted to remain intact. It is unsettled, reinterpreted, and given new life. To quote Faulkner, the past is never dead. It's not even past. This is the creative arc I trace in The Author is Cannibal, the understanding that every act of appropriation can become a gesture of liberation, every act of cannibalizing a step towards reimagining the world one has inherited. Writers and artists have the capacity to show us that cannibalism is not an ending, but a beginning, a way of making history speak again, of making light return where shadow once held sway. Their work teaches that nothing must remain as it was handed down, that the so-called forbidden can be taken up, transformed, and made one's own. That creation is an endless ronde, a circle in which artists hold hands across time, across continents, across the boundaries imposed upon them. It is in this circle, the space of mutual ingestion and renewal, that the future of art takes shape. And it is Maryse Condé and Françoise Sémiramoth together who show us how the cannibal imagination makes that future possible. Thank you.
Qu'est-ce que tu veux que je dise après ça?
Petite charge.
C'est ça. Thanks a lot, Felisa, for this presentation. And what else can I say after that? You know, it's, yeah. Actually, I won't speak long because I prefer after to share, you know, question and response with you guys. But yes, when Maryse sent me the text, Françoise Sémiramoth cannibalizes Caravaggio, I was a bit surprised at the beginning because it was like I never heard about this word cannibalization in art, you know. And as an artist, it was very strange for me to receive this text. And I recognize actually the ironic and the provocative way that she sent, why she sent me this text. But the more I was reading this text, the more I was understanding the text. And then I realized that reinterpretation is like cannibalization, but when you are creating something and when you decided, for example, to reinterpret Caravaggio's painting, such as Boy Bitten by a Lizard, you doesn't think about the way that you want to reinterpret the work. You just think about how to give a voice, how to shape your work, and how to talk with the author of the original work. And when I decided to reinterpret Boy Bitten by a Lizard, I made some researches about Caravaggio, and then I realized that Caravaggio took inspiration in Sophonisba Aguisola, Andrew's ballet, Bitten by a Crowfish. So it's the inverse, Sémiramoth, Caravaggio, and then Anguissola. So it's interesting that every artist took inspiration to another artist. And yes, Caravaggio is chiaro oscuro. Yes, Caravaggio is from the 17th century. I'm from the 21st century. But the fact that it's very hard to, for example, here, to see the shape of the fabric here, or even the hand. It was hard for me to draw the hand here, and I took inspiration with my own hand here, and the hand also of my companion, Gilles Benistri, who is here. And the fact that I had to figure out how to reinterpret without the shadow, without this light and the confrontation of the two, I used the color. And because of that, it's emerged the color for me. I was used to paint with color, but when I saw Caravaggio's painting, it was kind of evident for me to draw this one and to put in my painting all the vegetation, the leaves, and it's a tribute to my island, Guadeloupe, but also a tribute to my family, my grandfather and my grandmother, where people were working the lands. And also this vegetation, the green, is also the witness of our history in Guadeloupe, on the island, from all the century, for all the centuries that we suffered during the slave slavery, but also now the fact that we have to struggle again and again in front of, you know, the fact that we are governed by France today, and when we have to decide for everything, we have to ask France to do everything. So this green, as Maryse said, she said that the green is the refusal, is the way to say no, and is the way to stand up and fight for our own rights. So even if this work, for example, is beautiful and is light with the brightness, it's also a way to give a tribute to my island and to talk about the people of Guadeloupe. And here, for example, the carnation of the character green, red, and orange, it's also a tribute to the first inhabitant of Guadeloupe, the Arawak, the first inhabitants of Guadeloupe who struggle and fight against the Spanish, but at the end they lose the fight. And the red, for example, is a little seed that the Arawak use to protect themselves against the sun and also against the mosquito. So even if this painting, this drawing was made in the 21st century, it refers to the 17th century. And to put those paintings, sorry for my English, I'm a bit stressed, but to put Caravaggio here and Sémiramoth here on the same level, it's a way also to think about how in the 17th century we were kind of amazed by Caravaggio's painting. And in the same time, in the 17th century, there was slavery in Guadeloupe. So here we are talking about Italian Renaissance, and in Spain, for example, we are talking about Siglo del Oro. But at the same moment, there were horror on another island, and it's a way for me to talk about this horror by beauty. And I think that, and I'm sure that Maryse understood that when she wrote this text. We talk a lot about Caravaggio, Creole Caravaggio series, and actually we had the opportunity to work together. Just before, yes. We had the opportunity to work together on this series. We were invited by Luma Foundation in Arles, and for an exhibition called It's Urgent, curated by Hans Ulrich Obrist. And when they invited us to participate to this exhibition in 2020, we talked a lot about this with Maryse, and then she said, maybe we can do something with Caravage Creole together. I say, yes, but how? She said, okay, just create a drawing and then I will write something for you. I say, okay, let's do that. You know. I say, okay, let's do that. So I sent this drawing inspired by conversion on the way to Damascus, the Serazi version. And then she sent me this text. So I will read it to you in French, and after I will translate it. Si le végétal devient roi, si les peaux changent de couleur évitant la terrible dichotomie qui nous fit tant de mal, si le cheval devient un symbole de faiblesse et d'aveuglement, c'est à la magie du rêve que nous le devons. Il faut rêver, c'est urgent. If the plant becomes king, if skins change color, avoiding the terrible dichotomy that harmed us so much, if the horse becomes a symbol of weakness and blindness, we owe it to the magic of the dream. We must dream. It's urgent. When Maryse wrote this text, it was during the pandemic, during COVID. And the exhibition, it was about it's urgent to live, it's urgent to believe. And the dream for Maryse, it was very, very important, and I think that's why she wrote this text, and then I put this text on this painting, and we showed this painting in Arles in 2020. But maybe I won't speak much because Felisa said so many things about my work and my collaboration with Maryse. Actually, the first time I met Maryse, it was through her book, I Tituba, Black Witch of Salem. And I was stunned by this book because I recognize myself in this book in many ways. And in 2004, I was reading Ségou. And when we went to Mali with my companion, and we wanted to go to Ségou, but we never been to Ségou. We went elsewhere, but I saw Mali actually. And back from Mali, I decided to continue to read Ségou. And Jeanne Gilles here told me, you should call Maryse Condé. Find a way to get in touch with Maryse Condé. And I say, yes, but how? Go on the internet and look for it. And then I found an email that she kept until her death. And I wrote to her in 2006. And then she answered many months after. She apologized, of course. And then I went to see her in Paris. And this is how it began for 20 years. And yes, Maryse Condé, and I'm sure Felisa will agree with me, was a person very, very, she opened many doors for us too, yes. And if we are here today, it's thanks to her and Richard.
For generosity.
Yes, very generous people, yeah. Maryse and Richard. And maybe you can put the picture. But just before there is Felisa and Maryse.
The Lycée Maryse Condé, opening of the Lycée Maryse Condé.
Yes.
Outside of Paris.
Yes, in Paris. And the other one was with Richard, me and Maryse, all three at Gordes, where she's living in the south of France. And we were used to visit her because it's not far from Marseille, actually. Yes. So now I will stop because I'm a bit moved. And if you have questions, we are here to answer. Thank you.
Questions, comments,
Yeah.
critiques, hopefully
Yes,
mild.
yes.
Hopefully mild.
Yeah. If you have any, I don't know, comments, you want to add something, go ahead.
Yes, thank you both very much. It really engendered a lot of thought. Hard, I had to
Oh, yes.
Sorry,
There we go.
I just wanted to say thank you and this was a concept that I did not understand, having seen your exhibit. I got a little bit of a writing, but it made me wonder, is this something that you feel is new? But I'm wondering if it's from way back when, that this is an interpretation, but I have a sense that it's not a new concept, but a new way of interpreting. In other words, that artists from way back and writers from way back would subsume something and keep it going. So just, is it different now than it was then? And what about in the future?
You are talking about the cannibalization?
Yes.
Yes.
It's true.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. All right, we'll pass the mic around. I think, and I'm not going to speak for how Françoise sees this, in the book I do make a very pointed distinction between reinterpretation and reimaginings and finding a specific group of people. In particular, I focus on those from writers and artists from former colonies in reaction to colonialism. So in the sense of like Françoise just showed, Caravaggio being inspired by a previous drawing, of course inspiration in writing and in art is common. But what I focus literary cannibalism and that kind of cannibalization in particular is in not only the reappropriation of a work that has a relationship to colonialism, so colonizer to colony, for example, but also in how they do their rewriting or reworking. So I do focus on this idea of bringing marginalized characters, generally those that were either minority characters, minority in the literal and figurative sense, bringing them to the forefront, changing the geography to, for example, in Maryse's case, from England to the Caribbean, and especially within the writing, critiquing the post-colonial condition of the homeland of the author. So I think all those things combined make it for a different type of work than just an inspiration or a reimagining. So there are parameters, I think, that need to apply for it to be a cannibalization, as opposed to just like Caravaggio taking inspiration from a previous drawing. I don't know if you want to.
No.
So that would be the difference, I think, if anybody wants to. Oh. Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I only had a short amount of time to read your work. I only briefly read the introduction. It was a busy day. But I had a few questions on your use of theory, particularly Fanon and César.
Sure.
So, I was really interested by your discussion of ingestion, and how different artists can ingest previous works of art. But kind of considering Fanon's argument of a new man and how to move towards a post-colonial world, I believe he argues that the only way to do this is to radically reject the colonial structure, and so you can't take any kind of elements of this old world into the foundations of a new one. So I kind of see that as a very different approach from cannibalization. So I was wondering, since you use both César and Fanon in your grounding of your work, do you kind of see that as a difference in theory, or I don't know. I was just wondering what your thoughts were and how Fanon would perhaps reinterpret your idea of cannibalization.
Oh, well, I don't want to presume to speak for Fanon, but in part of what you are arguing, you make a very valid point in the desire to refuse anything and everything associated with the colonizer, and I do devote a bit of this in the book, in each chapter, on the constant struggle of the Francophone writer, which is shorthand for anyone writing in French outside of France, although that word is very heavy in this literature. The constant struggle to want to break away and critique France but still being stuck writing in French. So I would say that Fanon, for all of his arguments for wanting to leave everything behind, is still writing in French, because there are some aspects that you cannot break with either easily, or what other language was he supposed to write in when that is the language that was imposed for so long. So I think there is a careful consideration of this imposed culture and language and how to work within this imposed system to critique it. But ultimately, you raise a very valid point. You're still stuck within it to a certain extent. We're still talking about Shakespeare and Bronte and Mérimée and Caravaggio. We're still referring to them, which is the paradox, right? You want to critique them, you want to break out of the system, but you are still confined to a system. So I think that, I can't speak for Fanon, but I think I recognize amongst other scholars of Francophonie the paradox of still being confined to the system. And also my book that I'm currently working on, the Manifesto pour une littérature monde, which argues for breaking away from the term francophone and just saying literature in French. It's breaking out of one cage to go into another, which is you refuse francophonie, but then you're in French. So there's no easy answer. You're still stuck within the system, but it is an excellent point. It's a prison of sorts. Françoise?
I was thinking about art history, the evolution of art history. And when I was a student, it was hard for me, for example, to find Caribbean, artists from the 17th century, for example. But because of the history, And I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about, in the 17th century, so there were, for example, here, Italian Renaissance, but on the continent, Africa, there were art also, but we never speak about that in art history for the Caribbean. And the Caribbean are mixed with European, African, Indian, and so on. So maybe there is a new concept of art history for the Caribbean, for example, for myself. And I'm thinking about that. And maybe I want to write about that, because it's impossible for me to keep on thinking that the future Guadeloupean, for example, who are doing art, are obliged to refer to this guy, Caravaggio, because there is nothing else for them. And when I'm speaking with my colleagues in Guadeloupe or Martinique or Guyane or Réunion, we know that we, the painter from the 21st and more the 20th century, we are at the beginning of something. And we have to be patient. I had, my father was a painter, so I grew up with the painting. And he was a self-taught, so he didn't go to school of art. And he had his own imagination, his own way of painting. And it was my first model, actually. It was, and I was lucky for that. But not all the Caribbean artists, the young Caribbean artists, has a mother or a father who is a painter. So we, in Guadeloupe and Martinique and Guyane, Réunion, Mayotte, the French department, the French overseas departments, we are at the beginning of something in art history. We recognize the Western art history, but there is another art history. And what we are doing in class, this is what I'm trying to do with you, in class, to talk about Ethiopian art, for example, yes, art in Japan, and make the connection with Maryse Condé, who is from Guadeloupe, Who knew that we could make the connection between Maryse Condé, Japan, and Ethiopia in art? We are doing that. So it's possible. But we have to be patient to have something new. Yeah.
And I just wanted to add a little bit to this, and this goes to French colonial history. There's a reason why I started at 69 in the 60s, and why, as Françoise says, she was lucky she had her father to serve as reference for art. The problem that we come back to in looking for references within the islands, within these territories, is previous to 1960 was colonization, and for these writers and artists to be able to express themselves, to write, to paint, was not really a possibility. And we don't have, there's a reason why there's a period, these huge periods of missing art and missing writing, not because there was no art or no writing, it's just that there was no possibility to write or paint. And so this creates this vide, this emptiness, which then we try to, these authors and painters are trying to address by filling this void with these references. But if there had not been colonization, who knows what the artistic references could have been throughout that time period. And that's why we have so little for these time periods, is because of colonization. So that is something that we are very keenly aware of as scholars within this field, is just the lack of produced material. And we have to remember that the French mission civilisatrice, which was at the heart of colonization, insisted that they were bringing culture and civilization to places where there was none. But there was none because they didn't allow it to flourish, right? So again, we're in this closed system and operating within its rules and confines, I think.
And we had few exceptions. In Guadeloupe, two guys, Guillaume Lethière, they were on exhibition last year at Clark, were from Guadeloupe, and Chevalier de Saint-Georges for classical music. But there were exceptions, you know. So, yes. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I have so many questions, but I think I wanted to talk a little bit about Maryse Condé and her idea of eating and food, and if you could talk about her love of food, and also but the pleasure of the act. And so right now I'm teaching another class where a character is traveling across one of her novels, a character is traveling across many geographies, and she's seeking a certain type of justice, and she keeps saying la vengeance, c'est un plat qui se mange froid. So vengeance is a meal that is eaten cold. It takes time to prepare, etc., etc. And my sense of reading Condé always was that there's such a pleasure in that moment of digestion, or that moment of unsettling or irritation. So I was wondering if you talk a little bit more about eating, but also pleasure. And you, Françoise, you talked about another one of your works that was inspired, that was about pleasure, right? The pleasure of recreation. So if you could talk about that.
Yes, Maryse was a foodie. She loved eating, and when we were going to visit her with Jill, we were doing, actually she loved one meal that I was doing, moltoni. Moltoni is an Indian meal that you can cook in Guadeloupe, because I have some Indian origins from my mother's side, and actually it's lentil, kind of soup and lentil with curry, turmeric, ginger, spice, a lot of spice, and lamb most of the time. And she was very happy when I was cooking that, and she was making some cakes, chocolate cakes. And yes, actually she made a book, she wrote a book, Mets et Merveilles, and she talked about a lot of recipes, you know, in this book. And
Breaking the rules of cooking. Yeah.
Yes,
in
with-
Maryse
yeah, that's
Condé,
true. Yeah,
she was
yeah,
a very adventurous cook. Made wonderful dishes always for her guests, but in Maryse Condé in particular, she talks about transgressing the rules of cooking,
Yeah.
putting things together that she
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
supposed to, and she would say that cooking, like art and writing, has no limits and should have no
With the
limits.
jambalaya, for
Yes, for the
example.
jambalaya. There was a few maybe not so successful
Yeah,
dishes,
yeah,
but
yeah.
most of the time, but it was, I think, all tied together.
Yeah.
Cooking, like writing, or asking you to paint, just make a drawing. I think that's very
Yeah, yeah,
Maryse. Just make a
yeah,
drawing.
yeah.
Just write this. She would say, "Oh, okay." But also, it was just all together a creativity. And when the chapter on Maryse Condé in my book, Sublime Phagocytosis. I mean, I owe that title to her. So, phagocyte. She loved that word
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it was about eating and enjoyment. So I would definitely say, although Maryse's work tended to have a kind of a difficult and sad side, there was also a joy of living
Yeah.
within the works.
Yeah, yeah. And about the work that you are talking about, the Bacchus that you can see at the 62 Center, yes, when people ask me about this work, I say that there is no historical meaning. I just enjoy drawing this guy, you know, and playing with the colors, playing with transparency, and yes, it's about Bacchus, you know, Dionysos, so the god of wine and feast. So yes, it's just pleasure. Yes.
Why not?
Yes, and why not?
Why not?
And sometimes, you know, as an artist, it's good to be in front of your work and enjoying every moment, you know, because you are putting this color or making that brush that way, or you feel here your work and you feel happiness and joy. And it's good to feel that. It's good also to work and to talk about history, but sometimes you need kind of rest, you know, and just enjoying the fact that you are creating. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? Oh.
I'm just looking back to how you were saying how you are at the beginning, trying to initiate a beginning creating, and just trying to leave. I'm wondering, so many things. So many things. I suppose on one level, it's just, I don't even know if this is working. On one level, it's like,
It was working.
It's working.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. On all these like different pieces that I've seen in the 62 Center, I just was wondering back to your beginning, like when you kind of embarked on this series, like what were you hoping to exercise, like in and out of yourself at the end of each kind of piece? Like I'm just wondering about your emotional landscape, you know, and the ingestion of, you know, history, and also the mutilation of it, and the reconfiguring, like just what did this do for you? What hope did it supply? You know, how did you evict things out of yourself? Like, I'm just wondering about, you know, just your personal journey, you know, through these kind of pieces, because they are so potent, you know, the colors, the intensity is just so strong. I'm wondering just if you could tell more about your journey, because it's very inspiring, and you say you're hoping to initiate beginning to cement like a litany of this kind of this art, and yeah, I don't know, I think it would just be nice to hear more.
when you are creating, you are not thinking about those questions, actually. Yes. You are just in front of your work, your canvas or your paper, and then you heard about the news on TV, for example, and it's stuck here in your head, and maybe a few months after it's coming back, or you make a journey, you are traveling. I'm going back and forth in Guadeloupe, and I see so many things over there. Happy to be there, yes, with my family, enjoying, you know, the food, the sun, the sea, swimming every day for hours, you know. But when I'm coming back in France, I miss my country, of course, but there are so many social problems over there, and it's a way for me to thank my island to create those work. And because I was born over there, my parents were born over there, my grandparents were born over there, and yes, it's a connection with my island because it's so far away from me. And creation, an artist can explain creation. It's deep inside of you. It's very intimate, actually. Very, very intimate. So the best way that I found to talk about what is inside of me, it's my work. They are my words, actually. My work are my words. And it's the best way for me to talk about my island to you, my history to you, and to all of you, actually. And yes, it's a way to leave a little stone, you know, on the path. And after me, I don't know what is going on, but yeah, they exist, actually. For a short moment, but they exist. So, yes. And, you know, Guadeloupe is a very, very, very tiny, tiny, tiny island, but with very strong people on it, very strong. So, yes, it's my tribute to my island, yeah.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
Because you speaking about the history of Guadeloupe, I told you when we met at the 62 Center to look at your art that I had been very moved by your painting Histoire de la Guadeloupe, and I had only seen it online, and so I couldn't see that you were superimposing and that you were in fact painting over that image of Caravaggio. Can you talk a little bit about how you ended up putting that, talking about that painting that is the history of the Guadeloupe over that, and how that came to be?
First, the screen printing for me, it was a new way to create, and then it was for me a way to say, okay, maybe I'm doing multiples, you know, many prints, many of them. And then I wanted to create something new, actually, and it was a way for me to erase, maybe, you know, Caravaggio, and a way to cannibalize, for sure, Caravaggio, and but to have behind this part of history, and on the top a new history.
Yeah.
Yes, it's evolution, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very moving, very powerful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Oh.
Thank you so much for sharing your work, and it's really interesting. So I have a question for you. So Françoise, I find it so interesting that, okay, I'm going to go over. So I'm just curious to hear more about whether your encounter with Maryse's work, and especially Tituba,
this work, do you think there is any way in which reading this work triggered something in you that then made it possible for you to do the Caravage Creole? So basically, I'm trying to find the link, because it's like your work resonates right between Maryse and you, and I'm wondering, especially because Felisa, you write, right, how much you thought Tituba was like you could have read it as a cannibalist work, but Maryse is like, no, it's not, right? So
I didn't want to argue.
Right, so I'd love to hear. I find it so interesting, and then I'd love to hear also Felisa more about, in the conclusion you talk about the literature non, right? And so how this is for you a continuation, and because it seems you seem to argue that there is no such thing as going out of the system, right? And how literature non is perhaps the same, even though it's trying to move away, so prompting the same. But I'm wondering whether in perhaps more contemporary Francophone writers, you see any ways of liberation that would not revert to cannibalism or to kind of appropriation and looking back.
Tu peux répondre la première. Vas-y.
Tu réponds?
Non, tu réponds. I'm going to think about it.
My first reading about Tituba, Black Wish of Salem, actually I made 2 paintings. But Maryse never saw this painting because, yes, I sold them. Yeah. And it was a long time ago. And no, I had no idea, when I read Tituba, I wasn't, because the first time I read Tituba, it was in 1988. And Caravaggio is in 2019, so I don't know.
Oh, in the relationship with
Yes, maybe. Yes, maybe. Actually, I don't know. No, I don't know.
Subconsciously, maybe.
Yes, maybe something like that, Yeah. Because it's strange, actually. We worked together, Maryse and I, about many things with the children, about a book, Chien fou dans la brousse. We had this project for 6 years, between Marseille and La Guadeloupe. And we also organized in Marseille many talks about her books, novels, and so on. But we really start to work together really in 2019 with Caravage Creole, because maybe she recognized herself in Caravage Creole and Creole Caravaggio. That's why, maybe. I never asked her to write about my work before, and when she saw the work, she said, okay, I'm going to write something, yes.
I mean, that's certainly what it felt like to be as I was reading the text, that she did recognize in your work herself and what she had been doing. I too had a similar moment with Tituba, Moi Tituba, when I first read it. I had been a French major who did not want to continue with French, frankly, because I was tired of reading books by dead white men about white men, and I was a little bit bored of it. But Moi Tituba, just this Guadeloupean writer writing in French about also taking on this story, which she said she was not inspired by, but we can disagree about that. At that moment, and it may seem simplistic, but I was like, oh, there's writing in French like this? If there's more like this, then I'm interested in this.
It's true.
It was really a revelatory moment for me, where I had to then seek out what is known as Francophone literature. And I slowly start to learn that there is a divide in literature in French. There is literature in French from France, which is just commonly referred to as French literature, divided by centuries and themes and periods. And then there's Francophone literature, which tends to date from the end of colonialism, so 1960s and going forward. So I think as you were asking me about the end of what is the future of cannibalization and whether it applies to this manifesto, I think as I was finishing the book, I thought there was more of a hopefulness in this manifesto and what it could do. And now as I've been working on the manifesto for a while, it's coming up on the 20th anniversary of this Manifesto pour une littérature monde, and seeing how little things have changed. I think the manifesto, for those of you not familiar with it, it was just a lot of writers in French being asked to no longer be marginalized and to be included in literature, in French literature. It could be written today because nothing has changed. As I was doing research for this book, I spent quite a bit of time at the BNF looking at their cataloging system. So just very much asking, how do you organize this? And there's littérature française by century, and then there's littérature francophone, and then further split into Antilles or Asia, and it's divided, so on and so forth. And they are apart physically and in the system. So that hasn't changed. In my book, I analyzed the way, in particular, and I was telling Françoise a little bit about this, newspaper coverage. I tried to find kind of a one-to-one equivalency between authors, Francophone authors, and looking at how they are portrayed in newspapers, for example, when they win awards versus when French authors win awards. And there's always a lot of qualifiers before as I told you, Maryse Condé, écrivaine Guadeloupe-born, and then there's a picture, so you make sure that you know that she's black, and there's like 4 different qualifiers to make sure that you as the reader are aware that this person was not born in France and that they are not white. So I'm looking at why is this the case, and unfortunately, as I'm getting to the end, and I don't know how to conclude other than like maybe in another 20 years, I don't know, but the system remains what it is, and I don't know what the answer is, because when you asked about maybe somebody who doesn't fit within that system, one of the authors I'm looking at is Atik Raimi, who is from Afghanistan, and he won the Goncourt. And I was looking for his book at the BNF, and so I asked the librarian, how is this classed? Because he writes in French, but he's not from a former colony, and he was very flustered. He's like, oh, je sais pas, il est pas français, mais il est pas francophone, mais on l'a, like we have the book, I don't know. Like he was very flustered. So the more people from outside of France, and especially somebody like Arhibi, who do not have ties to colonialism, continue to write in French, I think this is going to really burst open the boundaries of these labels, of this nomenclature, which is, I think, still very restrictive. So hopefully, with more time, as more people write in French, that France will be obliged to get rid of this etiquette. No?
Exactly.
Did you want to add anything?
No, sure.
Oh, 2 at the same time.
Nothing, I'm just reflecting a lot on, so I'm also like, I also lived in France and Lebanese, so we also have this colonial kind of relationship. And I'm curious what you think of, like, what I see in the French cultural landscape of people of, like from, I'm thinking Arab countries, like Camel Dawood, whatever. Which I think sometimes to be successful there are like kind of adopting the general French, like I have a lot to say about Camel Dawood and his little positions he takes, and like internalize the Islamophobia.
Right?
Sorry, yes.
Yes.
Yes. And I feel like there is also this thing, like to make it in France in the cultural sphere, where you have to, they adopt also these kind of visions of like self-internalized Islamophobia or colonialism. I don't know. And what do you like? And this is why I don't live in France, because I feel like there's this kind of something that's stuck in the past that I don't know. I feel like we don't have as much here. You know. I don't know.
No. I'm going to take that last part that you said, that there's a component of being stuck in the past, because it's very interesting. And I don't want to speak for all French people, but when I'm in France and I say that I'm working on the legacy of colonialism, I frequently encounter but that was so long ago, as if we're not still experiencing today the effects of colonization. And you talked about the la traite. I mean, that was hundreds of years. How do you think in just overnight we're past that? It was so long ago, but it's not so long ago. Daoud is an interesting case because I remember distinctly one of my reviewers in the manuscript stage has said, "I can't believe you didn't include him," and I'm like, well, he doesn't fit the criterion for one, and I think that his rewriting of Camus is not doing this kind of critical rewriting of, like you in your paintings, bringing the history of the island over Caravaggio. You're doing something very specific. I don't understand this rewriting that Daoud did. I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't understand it, but I don't see it in the same way. But yes, he does remain a bit of a disappointment, I think. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, no, especially recently when he
Yes.
published that letter apologizing for. Okay, yes. I don't know if I should get into this now, but
I had a question, but
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just I was interested in what you were saying. I love this whole concept of artistic cannibalization, and when you were talking about the colonizer's envy of the cannibal, and it made me start thinking about sort of the reverse of this artistic cannibalization process when a colonizer culture cannibalizes its own colonial subjects. I'm thinking about like blackface performance, or Picasso appropriating African or Colombian aesthetics. And I was just, I was thinking about exoticism and Orientalism and how much they are postures of desire to consume and even become in some ways. If the white gaze wants to cannibalize the cannibal. And I was just interested in how that fits into your analysis of this process.
So that's an hard question. Well, join in if you think of something.
Yeah.
Just coming back to this concept of the civilizing mission that France always had at the forefront of colonization. I invite us all, as we visit the big museums in Europe, to look at all of the pilfered art from the former colonies. I'm thinking of the African continent in particular, as they made this argument that there was no culture and no civilization, so that's why they had to go there, yet the art and culture of those countries is in their museums. So it's an argument that doesn't hold water, and there is an envy and a desire, and we see now, fortunately, an effort to return some of the art. I'm thinking about the Benin artifacts and how they're slowly making their way back, but there is clearly an envy and a desire to take and assimilate on behalf of the European. And this is why I think this is such a clever way to critique, because anybody can write a critique of colonialism. And I'm thinking about, since you brought up Césaire earlier, his discourse on colonialism, Le Discours sur le colonialisme. It's just a pamphlet screed for 40 pages of why Europe is terrible. But there's something delicate and artistic in taking the work of the colonizer and reshaping it to make it your critique, and so that they know that you've taken their thing and you've altered it to make your critique, but also it's very good. Like, this is excellent, right? I mean, and you read Une Tempête and you're like, my goodness, he really rewrote Shakespeare, and it's a great play, and it's also incredibly critical of colonialism. So there's not only the aspect of making your critique heard, but also showing off literarily or artistically that, it's kind of nice, I think, as a way of doing a critique as opposed to just complaining. Françoise? Non? Tu veux ajouter quelque chose?
Non, tout est dit en fait. Sorry. No. I was thinking about the blackface stuff. It's not hard. Point. That's it. It's not hard. So we even don't have to argue about that, to talk about that. It's not hard. I'm thinking about, maybe you heard about this exhibition in London, I think, Exhibit B. Have you heard about this exhibition? No? Take a look. Exhibit B, actually, it's an artist, an English artist, I think, a white artist, who decided to talk about black people, you know, and during slavery, nowadays, and he decided to take real people to represent his work. For example, black people, you know, in an electric chair, real black people, you know, black people, you know, unchained. And there were huge polemics about that. And in France, we were a lot of black artists, actually. We made some manifestation about that. And for me, you know, it's when you are doing a critique about something, is this guy is allowed to do that and to use real people to represent his heart? I don't know. I don't have the response for that. I was furious, actually, to see. I don't need someone to represent myself, my history, in a real people like this. I don't need that. But it's hard. He has the right to do it. But in which way? And maybe the connection with blackface, it's tiny between that and blackface. But blackface is definitely not hard. So we don't have to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also a very important aspect of this cannibalization, literary or otherwise, is addressing the concept of punching down versus punching up, right? So when the authors from the former colonies, many of them who did experience colonization, are rewriting the canon, they're punching up. And when I see something like blackface or using this kind of art as punching down, and that's when, to me, it becomes problematic.
Yeah.
So I think the remaining mindful of the power structure and where people are situated in power relations will always be very important in what is considered acceptable within art. As you said, does he have a right to do it? Sure, but do we have to consider it art? No.
Yeah. The last question, Casey. Yeah.
This is somewhat tangential, but I was curious about how the concept of cannibalization can interact with when you take a work that was originally imitating how do I explain this? If you take a work that was originally imitating or stealing from another culture and then you reinterpret or you cannibalize it again, what I'm thinking of is with like Orientalist works, because we've been studying that in one of my classes, and how if you return to it and create your own critique of it, how those two ideas can interact when it's not directly cannibalizing I'll say like not directly cannibalizing a work that's like Shakespeare or like the Bronte pieces, but that are also themselves taken from something else. I don't know if that was
I'm thinking. I think as been argued by many, including us tonight, is that we recognize the inspiration taken by everyone in production, in artistic or literary production. So at some point, you will be able to trace whatever work to a previous work. That's there. I think a good example of what you're asking about would be the Picasso painting, and Françoise and I talked a little bit about this because Picasso is nothing if not problematic. We can all agree. So I was at first reluctant to use that as a starting image, but it's the connection, I think, that comes afterwards, where Djebal, as an Algerian woman, writer, sees that he has in fact freed the harem that Delacroix painted, in which he puts these women in this very subservient, gaze down, enclosed room. She saw Picasso as freeing them. So I think when somebody like Djebal comes along and explains it in such a way that then I can say, okay, maybe I forgive Picasso briefly because he did free these women, and she, as an Algerian woman, is giving me permission to see it as okay, then that works. So I think, as I would say to all of my students, especially when we're considering Francophone literature, that context matters. Contextualizing, learning the history, finding out what is happening around it, what are people reacting to, what is being referenced in these works, and then deciding for yourself. Maybe you don't agree with me, that maybe you say Picasso is never okay, and that's fair. Then deciding whether or not that chain serves this purpose of literary or artistic cannibalization, or it doesn't, and it's just an homage in a way, or plagiarism, as some have said. So I think it's for us to decide individually how it fits within that paradigm. Françoise?
Yeah, no, it's okay.
No,
I may agree. Yeah.
Thank you for your wonderful questions.
Thanks to you.